The text came through at 6:40 on a Tuesday evening, while I was rinsing a single coffee cup at my sink. Sunday, 6 o'clock. Just us. I want to fix things, Mom. I read it 4 times before I let myself believe it. 5 months. That's how long Maya and I had gone without anything that could be called a conversation, a clipped call on my birthday, a text about a dentist appointment she thought I still needed reminding about, nothing that reached past the surface. 5 months since she'd stood in my kitchen with one of Derek's spreadsheets in her hand, asking me to sign off on simplifying the trust distributions, and I'd said no, and she'd left without finishing her tea. I spent 31 years reading people for a living. Not in a courtroom, in windowless back offices at the bank, going through statements line by line, looking for the moment an elderly client's signature started looking a little too eager, a little too grateful. I built a career on not being fooled. And still, when my own daughter asked to fix things, I put on the green cardigan she'd once told me made me look approachable, and I drove out to the house, my house, if I let myself think that way, which I tried not to. Derek and Maya had lived there since Robert died, the two of them installed in the property like it had always belonged to them, and some mornings I still woke up in my little rental on Haywood expecting to smell the dogwoods from my old bedroom window instead of the neighbor's dryer vent. The porch light was on when I pulled into the gravel drive. Through the front windows I could see the dining room lit gold, 3 places set, and for one foolish second I let myself imagine it really was just going to be dinner. Priya was waiting on the steps. She'd been coming to my place 3 mornings a week since March, hired through some agency Maya had found, help around the house, she'd said, someone to keep an eye on things since I lived alone now. Priya was quiet, careful, good at crossword puzzles and terrible at hiding what she was thinking. Tonight she was terrible at hiding it, Mrs. Marsh. She came down 2 steps to meet me before I reached the door, and her hand landed on my forearm. Not gripping, just resting there like she needed somewhere to put it. I need you to hear me before you go in, Priya. What on earth? There's a team coming. Not police. A mobile crisis unit, the kind that does welfare checks. Mrs. Voss called them an hour ago. Her voice dropped even lower, like the house itself might overhear. She told them her mother said she didn't think she could keep going. That you told her you didn't see the point anymore and then you hung up on her. I felt the ground do something strange under my feet. I never said that. I haven't called Maya since Sunday, I know. Priya's eyes were wet, and furious, and scared all at once. I was in the kitchen when she made the call. I heard the whole thing. Please, don't go in there tonight. Just, not tonight. 31 years of watching people lie to loan officers, to their own children, to themselves, and I still needed a second longer than I should have to understand what she was telling me. Then it landed, all at once, cold and total. This wasn't dinner. This was a stage, and I'd been invited to walk onto it exactly on cue, where, I said, the Henderson side yard. There's a hedge. You can see the porch from there. She was already pulling me by the sleeve, glancing back at the house like it had eyes. Please, Mrs. Marsh. I let a home care aide half my age walk me across a stranger's lawn in the dark and settle me behind a boxwood hedge like we were children playing a game with real stakes. My knees did not appreciate it. Neither did my dignity. I crouched there anyway, phone silenced in my pocket, and watched my own front porch the way I used to watch surveillance photos spread across a conference table, waiting for the detail that would tell me everything. It didn't take long. A white SUV turned into the driveway 11 minutes later, no lights, no siren, nothing dramatic at all, which was somehow worse. 2 people got out, a man and a woman, both carrying clipboards, both moving with the unhurried competence of people who did this every day. Not officers. I recognized the posture from 100 case files, mobile crisis response, the kind that gets called when someone reports a welfare concern. The front door opened before they reached it. Maya stood in the frame, and even from 30 yards away, in bad light, I could see she'd been crying, or had convinced herself she had. She pressed a hand to her chest, said something I couldn't hear, gestured back into the house with the particular helplessness of a woman performing worry for an audience. Derek appeared behind her a moment later, one hand on her shoulder, his face arranged into something between concern and apology. I'd spent 3 decades learning the difference between a person telling the truth and a person delivering a line they'd rehearsed. Maya's grief had the wrong rhythm. It peaked too fast and recovered too smoothly. The way people cry when they know they'll need to stop crying soon to answer questions clearly. The woman with the clipboard asked something. Maya answered at length, touching her own collarbone, shaking her head slowly, mouth forming words I didn't need to hear to understand. She said she didn't want to be here anymore. The man wrote as she spoke. Derek nodded along at exactly the right moments, like a man agreeing with testimony he'd helped write. They were building a record. Right there, on my own front porch, under a light fixture I'd chosen myself, my daughter was constructing the first page of a file that would say I was in crisis, that I needed intervention, that decisions about my life could no longer safely be left to me. I stayed behind that hedge until the SUV pulled away and the porch light went dark and my legs had gone from stiff to genuinely unwilling. Then I drove home with both hands locked on the wheel, and I did not cry, and I did not call Maya, and I did not sleep. Instead, at 11 that night, I pulled the accordion folder marked Estate, Robert out of my hall closet, the one I hadn't opened since the lawyer's office 18 months ago, and I sat at my kitchen table and read the trust agreement from the first page to the last, slowly. The way I used to read a file when I already suspected what it would tell me. I found the clause. On the 9th page. Co-trustees, acting jointly or severally in matters concerning the settler's welfare. Empowered to request wellness evaluations, to petition for a determination of incapacity, to manage disbursements pending such determination. I had signed that. Grieving, exhausted, grateful for anyone willing to handle the paperwork, I had signed away exactly the door they just tried to walk me through. The next morning, Priya showed up for her regular Tuesday shift 20 minutes early, and she didn't knock so much as tap, like she was testing whether the door was safe to open. I'd made 2 cups of tea before she arrived. I set hers across the table from mine, not beside it, and I didn't ask her to sit down right away. 31 years of interviews had taught me that the first question is never the real one. You let the silence do the early work. You didn't sleep, Priya said, looking at me instead of the tea. Neither did you. From the look of it, she sat. Her hands wrapped around the mug like she needed the heat for something other than warmth. Mrs. Marsh, I have to tell you something, and I don't know how to say it so it doesn't sound worse than it is. Just say it plainly. Plain is easier to trust, she nodded, the way people do when they're rehearsing a line they've already said to themselves a dozen times. When the agency placed me with you in March, it wasn't a general home health assignment. Mrs. Voss called them directly. She asked for someone who could, in her words, keep a close eye and note anything concerning. Priya's jaw tightened. She gave me categories. Memory. Mood. Whether you seemed isolated. Whether you talked about Mr. Marsh like he was still around. Spending habits. She wanted it written down, dated, specific. I kept my face still, the way I used to across a conference table from someone I already knew was lying, back when the only thing that mattered was not letting them see me arrive at the truth before they'd finished telling it to me. And you wrote it down, at first, yes. I didn't think much of it. Families ask for that sometimes, when they're far away, when they're worried. It felt like due diligence. She looked down into her cup. But the things she wanted me to flag started feeling less like worry and more like she wanted the file to say something specific, whether or not it was true. Show me. She hesitated only a second before pulling a folded spiral notebook from her bag, the kind you'd buy for 11 cents in a school supply aisle. She'd clearly debated bringing it. I understood the debate. Handing it to me was an admission that she'd been keeping it in the first place. I read it at the table, slowly, the way I used to read a file I already suspected would tell me something I didn't want confirmed. March 14th, Mrs. M. couldn't find her car keys for 20 minutes, said she must have set them down somewhere strange. Seemed frustrated, not concerned. March 22nd, Mrs. M. told the same story about the dogwood tree twice in one afternoon, 10 minutes apart. Didn't seem to notice. April 3rd, Mrs. M. referred to Mr. Marsh in present tense while looking at a photograph. Corrected herself immediately. April 9th, Mrs. M. forgot to take her evening medication, found the pills still in the organizer the next morning. Every single entry was true. I remembered every one of them, the way anyone remembers the small, unremarkable failures of an ordinary week. I had lost my keys because I'd set them on the porch rail instead of the hook by the door. I'd told the story about the dogwood twice because it was a good story and I liked telling it. I'd looked at Robert's photograph and, for one soft half-second, forgotten he was gone, which is not decline, that is grief, doing what grief does, on an ordinary Tuesday, written down in a spiral notebook with dates attached, in the hands of someone who wanted them to mean something. They read like the first pages of a case file. "This is good work," I said, and Priya flinched like I'd struck her. "I don't mean the surveillance. I mean the honesty of it. Every line here is true and every line here is being misused, and that's not your fault, that's a design choice someone else made." "I almost quit after the second week," she said. "I would have, except," she stopped, "except what?" "Except I remembered what you did for my brother." Her voice thinned. 2 years ago. Before I ever worked for you. Rohan's disability claim got denied twice, some clerical error nobody at the state office could explain, and you were the woman at the community clinic who sat with him for 3 hours and found the coding mistake nobody else had bothered to look for. You didn't know me. You didn't have to help him. You just did, because you saw a file being handled carelessly and it bothered you. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her wrist, embarrassed. When Mrs. Voss started asking me to write these things down, I thought about that afternoon, and I couldn't make myself be the person who did to you what got done to him. I let that sit for a moment, because it deserved to. Then I asked her the question I'd been circling since she sat down. Does Maya know you've stopped writing things down the way she wants? No. I still send her something every week. I leave out anything that isn't true, and I stopped writing down the things that were true but didn't mean what she wanted them to mean. Priya met my eyes. I don't know how long I can keep doing both without her noticing, then we won't ask you to for very long. I closed the notebook and set it flat on the table between us, a decision more than a gesture. I need you to keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Nothing more, nothing braver. If she asks for something specific, give her something true and small and useless. Do not lie to her outright. I won't ask you to risk your job for me. Just don't help her build something out of nothing. What are you going to do? What I did for 31 years before I ever met you or your brother. I stood, and my knees reminded me, unhelpfully, that crouching behind a hedge 2 nights ago had cost me something. I'm going to read the numbers. After Priya left for her afternoon rounds, I sat down at Robert's old desk, mine now, though I still thought of it as his, and logged into the Trust's online portal for the first time in longer than I wanted to admit. Derek had set it up 18 months ago. Walked me through it once with the patient, slightly pitying tone people use on parents they've decided are past the point of really needing to understand things, and I had let him, because grief makes you grateful for anyone willing to carry a folder you don't want to open. I opened 18 months of statements instead. Most of it was exactly what I expected: property tax, insurance, the modest quarterly distributions Robert had structured for Maya and me both, a landscaping invoice. Nothing that made my pulse do anything at all. I read the way I used to read at the bank, not looking for the big red flag, because the big red flag is never the first thing that appears. You look for the entry that's shaped wrong. The transfer that doesn't have a matching invoice. The disbursement coded to something vague enough that nobody was supposed to ask about it twice. I found it on page 6 of the March statement. A withdrawal of $42,000, dated the same week Maya had first mentioned, almost in passing, that Derek's firm was doing some really exciting things this year. The line item read only, trustee disbursement, advisory services, per co-trustee authorization. No invoice. No vendor name I recognized. No signature line I remembered putting my name to. I sat with that number for a long time, the cursor blinking on the screen, the house very quiet around me, and felt something colder than anger settle into the part of me that used to sit across desks from people just like this and ask them. Gently, patiently, to explain exactly where the money had gone. I let the withdrawal sit on the screen for 3 days before I did anything about it, which was 3 days longer than I would have advised any client of mine to wait. But this wasn't a client's kitchen table. This was mine, and some old, stubborn part of me kept hoping I'd find a simpler explanation if I just looked one more time: a home repair I'd forgotten, a tax payment misfiled under the wrong category. I didn't find one. I found 4 more like it instead, spread across 11 months, each one coded to something vague, each one just under the threshold that would have triggered a second signature under the trust's normal terms. If I'd set the terms up the way I thought I had, on the 4th day, I called Frank Delacroix, and I had spent 19 years 2 desks apart at the bank, back when fraud review still meant paper files and phone calls instead of algorithms flagging suspicious transfers before a human ever saw them. He'd retired 8 months before I did, out of some combination of principle and exhaustion after the bank started trusting software over people who'd spent decades learning to read a client's hesitation. We hadn't talked much since. That felt like its own kind of failure now, calling him only because I needed something. "Elena Marsh," he said when he picked up, like my name was a small, pleasant surprise. "Don't tell me you're calling to catch up. You've got that voice." "What voice?" "The one you used on Whitfield Trust in 2011, right before you told him his favorite teller had been running a skim for 3 years. He laughed, but it wasn't unkind. "What's wrong?" I told him. All of it: Maya's dinner invitation, Priya at the door, the evaluation team on the porch, the trust clause on page 9, the notebook of true and misused details, the withdrawal I couldn't account for. Frank didn't interrupt, which was the same thing I remembered loving about working with him. He let a story finish before he started picking it apart. When I was done, there was a pause long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. "Send me what you've got," he said finally. "All of it. Statements, the trust document, whatever Priya gave you. And Elena, I mean tonight, not next week." He came over 2 days later with a laptop, a legal pad, and a bag of the terrible gas station coffee he'd always preferred to anything I made, which was its own small, welcome piece of the past sitting down at my kitchen table. "You still keep good records," he said, scrolling through 18 months of statements I'd organized by hand the night before. "Half these clients I used to deal with couldn't tell you what year it was, let alone find a bank statement. I had 31 years of practice not trusting my own memory." "Good. You're going to need it." He turned the laptop toward me. I built a simple tracking sheet. Every disbursement over $1,000, dated, categorized, cross-referenced against anything that looks like a matching invoice or vendor record. Most of what's here checks out fine. Landscaping, insurance, the usual noise. He tapped the screen. "It's the ones that don't check out that matter." He'd color-coded them red. There were 9. The first was the $42,000 I'd already found, dated the week Maya mentioned Derek's firm having a really exciting year. The second, 3 weeks later, was smaller, $18,500, coded almost identically. Then a third, then a fourth, the amounts drifting upward as the months went on. The intervals between them shrinking. By the 9th entry, dated 6 weeks ago, the number had climbed to $61,000, and the gap since the previous withdrawal had narrowed to just under 3 weeks. "That's not a pattern of someone skimming a little off the top now and then," Frank said quietly. "That's a pattern of someone who needs more, faster, every single time." I stared at the total at the bottom of the column. $211,000, moved out of a trust meant to hold what was left of Robert's life's work, funneled, according to the wire destinations Frank had pulled from the account routing numbers, into an account belonging to Voss Capital Advisory, Derek's firm. "He's not stealing for a vacation home," Frank said. "Nobody escalates like this for a vacation home. This is someone plugging a hole that keeps getting bigger." I thought of Maya's clipped phone calls, the way she'd started sounding tired instead of triumphant the last few times I'd caught her voice through the aide's careful updates. "You think the firm's in trouble? I think the firm's numbers would tell us for certain, and we don't have those yet. But this," he tapped the red column, "this is a man who needed $211,000 badly enough to take it from his wife's mother 11 times in under a year, without ever mentioning it to her. That's not confidence. Elena. Confident people don't need to hide the withdrawal descriptions behind language like advisory services. I sat with that for a long moment, feeling the old, familiar click of a case starting to take a shape I recognized, mixed with something rawer that had nothing to do with professional satisfaction at all. This wasn't a stranger's account. This was Robert's trust, built to take care of Maya, and her husband had been quietly bleeding it dry while his wife stood on our porch performing grief for a crisis team. I need this to be more than a spreadsheet, I said. I need it to be something a court will look at and understand in under 5 minutes, then we do this the way we always did it. Clean, documented, boring. Boring wins cases, Elena. You taught me that. Frank was already making notes on his legal pad. You need an estate attorney, somebody who specializes in trust litigation, not a general practice guy who'll fumble the fiduciary language. I know someone. Renata Ibarra. She's sharp, she's fast, and she doesn't scare easy, which you're going to need, because the second you file anything, they'll come back hard. How hard? They'll say you're confused. They'll say the co-trustee language gives Derek broad discretion and this is all within his authority. They'll say you're an elderly woman still grieving her husband, prone to suspicion, maybe not thinking as clearly as you used to. He said it flatly, without softening it, which I appreciated more than sympathy would have. You need to be ready for that particular ugliness, because it's going to come from people who know exactly which nerve it hits. I've spent my whole career telling clients that the truth doesn't care how ugly the fight gets, I remember. I also remember you telling me that knowing the truth doesn't make hearing it said out loud about yourself hurt any less. Frank closed the laptop gently. I'll call Renata in the morning. In the meantime, don't confront anyone. Not Maya, not Derek, not the aide. The single worst thing you can do right now is let them know you're building something before it's built. I nodded, though something in me resisted the idea of doing nothing while my daughter's marriage collapsed into a scheme I was only just beginning to understand the shape of. But he was right, and I knew he was right, in the same bone-deep way I'd known it 100 times across 100 other cases that weren't mine. Frank gathered his things to leave, then paused at the door, the legal pad tucked under his arm. One more thing, he said, and something in his voice had shifted, gone careful in a way I didn't like. I ran a basic search on Voss Capital while you were making coffee. Public filings, nothing invasive. Elena, that fund has had 4 different address changes in 3 years. 2 changes of registered agent, and a client roster that's shrunk by nearly half since last spring. He shook his head slowly. Whatever's happening over there, it isn't new money chasing a good opportunity. It looks like a structure that's been quietly falling apart for a while, and your $211,000 might just be the thing that's been holding the roof up this long. Frank's words sat with me long after he left, the observation clinging to the edges of everything else I tried to do that evening. A structure quietly falling apart. My $211,000 holding up a roof that was never mine to prop. I called Renata Ibarra the next morning. She kept an office downtown, small and unglamorous, stacks of case files instead of the leather and mahogany trappings I half expected from a trust litigator. She listened the way Frank had, without interrupting, without the reflexive sympathy people default to when they think you're a fragile older woman describing a family misunderstanding. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me directly. I want to be honest about what we're dealing with, she said. The co-trustee language in your husband's trust is broad. Broad enough that a judge might initially read Derek's disbursements as within his discretion, even the ones that look bad to you and me. What we need isn't just the withdrawal pattern. We need to show the disbursements weren't for trust purposes at all, that they were self-dealing, dressed up in vague language to survive a casual glance. Frank thinks the firm itself is failing. If that's true, it changes everything. Renata leaned forward. A trustee mismanaging funds is one thing. A trustee siphoning a family trust to keep his own failing business alive while planning to have the other trustee declared incompetent so she can't stop him, that's not mismanagement. That's a scheme with a shape to it. Judges respond to shape. She recommended we move on 2 fronts, same as Frank had predicted days earlier, a civil action to freeze further disbursements and force a full accounting. And separately, once we had more concrete evidence, a regulatory complaint against Voss Capital Advisory itself. The regulatory piece takes time, she warned. State securities examiners don't move quickly. But if his firm really is unraveling, filing now, before it collapses on its own, means we're the ones who framed the story instead of him, and if I file and I'm wrong? If this really is just a broad but legal use of trustee discretion, then you've embarrassed yourself and possibly ended your relationship with your daughter for good. Renata said it without softening it, and I respected her for that more than I could have said. I don't think you're wrong, Elena. But I want you walking into this with your eyes open. Because once we file, there's no quiet version of what happens next. He'll know. She'll know. And you won't get to control how either of them reacts. I thought about the porch light going dark 2 weeks ago while I crouched behind a stranger's hedge. I thought about the notebook, the true entries turned into evidence of a decline that never happened. I thought about Maya's face on that porch, performing a grief I still couldn't be certain was entirely fake. File it, I said. Renata filed the emergency accounting petition on a Thursday. I spent that evening the way I'd spent most evenings since March, alone, with the television off, listening to a house that had never once, in 30 years, felt this quiet. Priya called 2 days later, her voice pitched low the way it got when she had something to say that she wasn't sure she should. I had a check-in call with Mrs. Voss today, she said. The kind she still has me do every couple of weeks, about how you're doing. Usually it's 5 minutes. Today it went almost 40, what happened? She started normal. Asked about your memory, your mood, whether you seemed isolated. I gave her the same kind of true, useless answers I've been giving her. Priya paused. But then she just kept talking. Not about you. About herself. She said she found some old photo albums in a box in the garage, the ones from when she was a kid. And she'd been going through them alone at night while Derek was at the office. She said she found one of you and her father, some birthday, and she just sat there with it for an hour. I closed my eyes. I could see it too easily. Maya at the kitchen table. Robert and I once shared with her. 30 years of family dinners between the two of us collapsed into a photograph she couldn't put down. She asked me something strange, Priya continued. She asked if I'd ever noticed you seeming afraid of anything. Not confused. Afraid. I told her no, and she got quiet, and then she said, I keep telling myself it's for her own good, and I don't know why I keep having to tell myself that. Something in my chest tightened at that, something I didn't want to examine too closely, because sympathy for Maya and clarity about what she'd allowed to happen to me were two things I needed to hold at the same time without letting either one collapse into the other. Did you tell her about the accounting petition? I don't think she knows yet. She didn't mention it. Priya hesitated. But right in the middle of the call, her phone buzzed with a text, and I heard her go still. She said, It's Derek, I have to go, and her voice changed completely. Flat. Careful. Like she'd put a different person on before she even answered. That detail didn't surprise me the way it should have. I'd watched something like it happen once before, from behind a hedge, watching Maya transform in real time between the person she was and the person the crisis required her to be. Now Priya was describing the same transformation from the inside, triggered by nothing more than a name lighting up a screen. She's afraid of him, I said, more to myself than to Priya. I don't know if it's fear exactly. It might be something closer to guilt that doesn't have anywhere safe to go. Priya's voice softened. Mrs. Marsh, I think she knows more than she's letting herself know. I don't think that makes what she did to you all right. But I don't think she's the one holding the knife, either. I didn't answer that right away. There was a version of me, the version that had crouched in wet grass at 63 years old watching a crisis team arrive for a danger that didn't exist, that wanted very badly to believe Maya was simply complicit, simply cold, simply someone I could file against and never think about again except as a name on a legal document. It would have been easier. Easier feelings rarely turn out to be the accurate ones. Thank you for telling me, I said instead. Keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Don't push her. Let her get there on her own, if she's going to get there at all. 2 days after that call, my phone rang at 9 in the evening. a number I hadn't heard from directly in months. Not through a lawyer, not through a hired aide, not filtered through anyone else's careful reporting, Maya. I let it ring twice before I answered, my heart doing something erratic and unhelpful in my chest. Mom. Her voice was thin, uncertain, nothing like the composed distress she performed on that porch. I know I don't have any right to call you like this. I know that. I found some old photos, and I couldn't stop thinking about you, and I needed to hear your voice, even just for a second. I sat very still at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd read Priya's notebook, where I'd found the first unexplained withdrawal, where I'd decided, alone, to let a lawyer file paperwork that would soon land on my daughter's doorstep like a verdict she didn't yet know was coming. I'm here, I said, carefully, giving away nothing of what I already knew, waiting to see what my daughter would say next, and whether it would be the truth or another performance built for someone else's benefit. I know I don't deserve to just call you like this, Maya said again, when I didn't fill the silence for her. I keep thinking about the year you taught me to make grandma's biscuits, standing on that step stool so I could reach the counter. I don't know why that's the memory that keeps coming back. It just won't leave me alone. Biscuits are a forgiving thing to learn on, I said carefully. Hard to ruin them completely. A small, surprised laugh escaped her, quickly swallowed. I miss you, Mom. I know that probably doesn't mean much right now. I know I haven't earned the right to say it. I wanted, badly, to ask her outright what she knew, what she'd agreed to, whether she understood what had nearly happened to me on that porch. But Renata's voice was in my head, calm and precise. You don't get to control how either of them reacts once this is filed. I wasn't ready to hand Maya a version of events she could carry straight back to Derek. I miss you too, I said, and meant it more than I wanted to. Come see me sometime. Just you. I will, she said, and for a moment she sounded almost like herself, the version of her from before any of this, before a wealth management firm and a husband with a hunger nobody had warned me about. Then her voice changed, went careful again, the way Priya had described. I have to go. I love you, Mom. She hung up before I could answer. The papers went out 2 days later. Renata filed the civil action for breach of fiduciary duty and demand for full accounting on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, at my direction, she'd also submitted the regulatory complaint against Voss Capital Advisory to the State Securities Division, built on everything Frank had assembled, the escalating withdrawal pattern, the vague disbursement language, the fund's shrinking client roster and rotating registered agents. 2 fronts, moving at once, the way Frank had said it needed to be. You'll want to brace yourself. Renata told me over the phone that evening. Derek's going to lawyer up fast, and knowing the type, he'll come out swinging instead of settling quietly. People who've been hiding something for this long don't know how to stop once they're caught. They just escalate the hiding. She was right. Within 48 hours, Derek retained a litigator named Walter Prescott, a man Frank recognized immediately from reputation, expensive, aggressive, and specialized in exactly the kind of case where the goal wasn't winning cleanly but making the other side too exhausted and too publicly embarrassed to keep fighting. Prescott's first move was a countermotion, filed directly with the probate court. Requesting an emergency competency evaluation of Elena Marsh. I read the filing at my kitchen table, Frank across from me again, both of us silent for a long moment. They're not defending against the trust suit, Frank said finally. They're trying to make the trust suit irrelevant. If they get you declared incompetent, none of this matters. The withdrawals, the regulatory complaint, all of it becomes the ramblings of a woman who can't manage her own affairs. They're trying to finish what the crisis team started in March, exactly. Except this time it's not a fabricated call to a welfare unit. It's a formal legal motion, with an actual attorney's name attached to it. Frank tapped the page. Prescott citing documented erratic behavior and a pattern of paranoid accusations against family. He's got something to build that on. I felt something cold settle low in my stomach. Priya's notebook, or something like it. If Maya handed over even the true entries, the misplaced keys, the repeated stories, looking at Robert's photo and speaking in present tense, dressed up the right way, in the mouth of the right expert witness, it reads exactly like what they needed to read like. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the shape of it. They'd built the file to be used exactly this way from the very beginning, and Derek's desperation hadn't invented a new tactic. He'd simply pulled the trigger on the one that had been loaded back in March, updated now with a lawyer's polish instead of a crisis team's clipboard. The local paper ran a small item 4 days later, buried in the business section but unmistakable in its shape. A quote from an anonymous source close to the family described Elena Marsh as increasingly withdrawn and suspicious since her husband's passing, and noted that family members have expressed concern about her ability to manage significant assets. No names, no direct accusation, just enough shading to plant the idea in anyone who happened to read it and know us. I recognized the architecture of it immediately because I'd built versions of it myself. Decades ago, for entirely different purposes, the careful, deniable planting of doubt, engineered to travel exactly as far as it needed to and no farther. It's the same play, I told Frank on the phone, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. Torn blouse, tears, a call to authorities before the target even walks through the door. Except this time the blouse is a newspaper item and the authorities are a probate judge. Does it rattle you? It should. I'm surprised how much it doesn't. I looked out at the garden Robert and I had shared, wondering whether they'd let me keep it, whether a judge somewhere would decide I couldn't be trusted to water my own tomatoes. I spent 31 years watching this exact tactic used against elderly clients who had nobody in their corner. I know precisely how it's supposed to work. Knowing that doesn't make it comfortable to have it aimed at me. It just means I know which moves come next. What came next, 3 days later, was Priya, calling in a state I hadn't heard from her before, not careful, not measured, but shaken. Mrs. Voss came to see me today, she said. Not a phone call. In person, at my apartment. She's never done that before. What did she want? She had a document with her. A prepared statement, typed up already, ready for a signature. It said, Priya's voice caught. It said I'd observed you exhibiting confusion, memory lapses, and paranoid ideation consistent with early dementia. It had specific dates on it. Some of them were dates I actually wrote in my log. Some of them weren't dates I ever gave her at all. My hand tightened on the phone. Did you sign it? No. I told her I needed time to think, which made her furious in a way I hadn't seen from her before. She said, this is for Elena's own good, Priya. You understand that, right? If you care about her the way you say you do, you'll help us protect her. Priya's voice wavered. Mrs. Marsh, I don't think she fully believes that anymore. I think she's saying it because she needs to believe it, not because she does. What did you tell her? I told her I'd call her back tomorrow. I bought myself a day. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. A long pause. If I refuse to sign, I think she'll find someone else who will. Some other aide, someone with less to lose. If I do sign, I'm handing them exactly what Derek's lawyer needs. I sat with that for a long moment, feeling the particular helplessness of watching someone else absorb the risk I'd set in motion. Don't sign anything, Priya. Not today, not tomorrow. If she pushes, tell her you want to speak with your own attorney first. That's true, sensible, and it buys more time than any excuse will. Okay. A shaky breath. Mrs. Marsh, she looked terrified. Not of losing the case. Of Derek. I don't think this is her idea anymore. If it ever fully was, that observation sat heavier on me than the forged dates had. It was Maya herself who called 2 nights later, her voice low, like she was speaking from somewhere she didn't want overheard. Mom, I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen before you say anything. I'm listening. Derek had me sign papers back in the spring. Statements about you. I didn't read them as carefully as I should have. I told myself they were just, routine, protective, the kind of thing families do when someone's getting older and living alone. I told myself that so many times I almost believed it. Her breath shook audibly. But Walter Prescott called me himself yesterday, wanting me to sign something new, something about a pattern of erratic behavior. And he had it phrased so carefully, so reasonably, and I couldn't make myself sign it this time. I don't know exactly when it stopped feeling reasonable. Maybe it never was. What changed? Priya told me she wouldn't sign her statement either. She said something to me, that if I actually believed you needed protecting, I'd be the one taking care of you myself, not handing lawyers paperwork designed to take you out of your own life. Maya's voice cracked fully now. She's right, and I hate that it took someone I barely know saying it out loud for me to hear it. I closed my eyes, feeling something in my chest pull two directions at once, relief, and a grief that had nowhere yet to land. Maya. I need to ask you something, and I need the truth. Did you know, in March, what was actually being arranged that night? The evaluation team. What they were told about me. The silence stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. I knew there was a call being made, she said finally, barely above a whisper. I told myself it was precaution. I didn't let myself ask what words he used on the phone. I didn't want to know, because if I knew, I couldn't keep telling myself it was innocent. A ragged breath. I'm not asking you to forgive that. I don't think I've earned the right to ask for that yet, no, I said quietly. Not yet, but I want to fix what I can fix now. If it comes to a hearing, if a judge needs to hear what actually happened, what he's been doing, what I let myself not know, I'll testify. I'll tell the truth, all of it, even the parts that make me look as bad as I know I've been. Her voice hardened, not with anger at me, but with something that sounded almost like resolve finding its footing for the first time. But Mom, I need you to promise me one thing first. What is it? Whatever happens to him after, the fraud, the trust, all of it, I need you to promise you won't go easy on him just because I still love him, some stupid, leftover part of me that I can't seem to kill no matter how much I want to. If I do this, I need it to actually mean something. I can't testify against my husband and then watch you pull the punch at the end because it's easier on all of us. I sat with the request for a long moment, feeling the full, complicated weight of what she was asking, not absolution, not even reconciliation yet, just a promise that her courage wouldn't be wasted on a softened outcome designed to spare everyone's feelings. I promise, I said. Whatever the truth turns out to be, that's what stands. No matter what it costs any of us. The Buncombe County probate courtroom smelled like every institutional room I'd ever sat in during my working life, floor wax and old paper and a nervous, recycled kind of air. I sat beside Renata at the petitioner's table, my hands folded on top of a manila folder I didn't need to open. I knew every figure inside it by heart. $211,000, 9 withdrawals, 11 months, a fabricated claim about self-harm that had never once come out of my mouth. Derek sat across the aisle with Walter Prescott, his suit pressed too carefully, the kind of care a man takes when he's trying to look like nothing is wrong. Maya wasn't beside him. She sat 2 rows back, alone, her hands white-knuckled around a small leather folder of her own. I hadn't spoken to her since her call 2 nights before it. I didn't know, sitting there, whether she'd actually go through with it. Judge Eleanor Whitfield entered without ceremony, a compact woman with reading glasses pushed up into gray hair, the kind of face that had clearly run thousands of hearings and had no patience left for theater. "This is an emergency competency and conservatorship matter," she said, without preamble. "I've read the petitions. I've read the responses. I expect this morning to move efficiently." Prescott rose first, laying out Derek's case the way I'd known he would. Elena Marsh, 63, recently widowed, exhibiting a documented pattern of memory lapses, paranoid accusations against family, and social withdrawal consistent with early-stage cognitive decline. He gestured to a binder. Observation logs. Dated entries. A prepared statement he did not yet mention had never been signed. "Your Honor," Renata said when her turn came, "I'd like to begin with the Trust's financial records, because I believe they explain a great deal about why this petition exists in the first place." She walked the judge through it methodically, the same climbing pattern Frank had color-coded and read at my kitchen table. The disbursements labeled advisory services with no invoice behind them, the total climbing from $18,000 to $61,000 across less than a year. Then she introduced the State Securities Division's preliminary findings on Voss Capital Advisory, a firm with a shrinking client roster, multiple address changes, and, as of 6 weeks ago, an emergency cash infusion that had failed to stop two major clients from formally requesting full withdrawal of their accounts. Your Honor, Renata said, this is not a family concerned about an aging mother. This is a man who has been quietly emptying a trust to keep his failing business alive, and who arranged to have my client forcibly evaluated on a fabricated claim in March of this year, for the express purpose of establishing grounds for the conservatorship he is requesting today. Prescott objected to the characterization. Whitfield overruled him without much interest and told Renata to continue. She called Frank first. He walked through the withdrawal pattern with the same dry, unhurried competence he'd shown at my table, and Prescott's cross-examination didn't so much as dent him. Frank had built cases like this for 2 decades, and being questioned on one felt, for him, like coming home. Then Renata called Priya. I watched Priya take the stand, smaller in that room than she'd seemed in my kitchen, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She described what she'd been hired to document, and why, in the end, she hadn't been willing to sign the statement Maya had brought to her apartment. Prescott tried to suggest she'd been paid off, coached, biased by gratitude toward me. Priya answered every question the same way, quietly. Plainly, without flinching. I wrote down what was true, she said. I just wouldn't let her use it to say something that wasn't. By the time Priya stepped down, I could feel the room's temperature shifting, the way a courtroom does when a story starts closing around a different shape than the one the defense arrived with. Then Renata said, Your Honor, the petitioner calls Maya Voss. I didn't turn around. I heard the small sound of a folder closing 2 rows back, the rustle of someone standing, footsteps that hesitated once, halfway down the aisle, before continuing. Derek's head came up sharply. I watched him watch his wife walk past him toward the stand, and something happened in his face I hadn't expected to see, not anger. Not yet, but a kind of dawning disbelief, as though some part of him was only now understanding that the marriage he'd built his defense around had a crack running all the way through it. Maya sat. She didn't look at Derek. She looked, briefly, at me, and then at Renata, and something in her shoulders settled, like she'd made a decision and was choosing not to unmake it. Mrs. Voss, Renata said gently, can you tell the court what you knew about the events of March 14th and 15th of this year? Maya's hands were shaking, but her voice, when it came, was steady. I knew there was a call being arranged. My husband told me it was a wellness check, that we needed to document my mother's state before we could get her help. I didn't ask exactly what he told the dispatcher. I told myself not asking meant I wasn't responsible for what happened. She took a breath. I know now that isn't true. Did your mother ever express any intent to harm herself? No. Maya's voice cracked slightly on the single word, then steadied again. Never. Not once. I've known my whole life what my mother sounds like when something is actually wrong with her, and that was never it. Prescott rose. Your Honor, the witness is the respondent's spouse. I'd ask the court to consider the obvious conflict, noted, Whitfield said, without much heat. Continue, counsel. Renata walked Maya through the trust withdrawals next. Through what she'd learned about her husband's firm in the last several weeks, through the prepared statement Prescott himself had asked her to sign just days earlier. Maya answered all of it, her voice occasionally faltering, never stopping. Mrs. Voss, Renata asked finally, why are you testifying today, against your own husband? Maya was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, she wasn't looking at Renata, or at the judge. She was looking at me. Because my mother raised me to believe that the truth matters more than how it makes you look, and I let myself forget that for almost a year. I don't get to keep forgetting it just because remembering costs me something. I felt my throat tighten in a way 31 years of professional composure hadn't prepared me for. Prescott's cross-examination was brief and largely useless. He tried to suggest Maya was acting out of guilt, out of manipulation by her mother, out of a dozen motives that all collapsed the moment Maya simply repeated, flatly, what she had seen and known and chosen not to ask about. By the time she stepped down, Derek was staring at the table in front of him, his composure gone entirely, the charming, capable man who'd once talked me through trust paperwork with such patient reassurance nowhere visible in the person sitting there now. Judge Whitfield called a short recess. When she returned, she didn't take long. This court finds insufficient basis for the requested conservatorship, she said. The evidence presented, including sworn testimony and documented financial records, indicates the underlying evaluation in March was initiated on a fabricated basis, and that subsequent efforts to establish incapacity were pursued in connection with undisclosed and apparently unauthorized disbursements from the Marsh Family Trust. She looked, briefly, at Derek. I am denying the petition in full, and I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for review of possible fraud and breach of fiduciary duty charges. Mr. Voss, I'd strongly advise you retain separate counsel for that matter. The gavel came down, quiet and unceremonious, nothing like the guillotine crack I might have imagined months ago. Back before any of this had a shape, Derek didn't move. Prescott leaned toward him, saying something low and urgent, and Derek nodded without appearing to hear a word of it. I wasn't looking at him, I was looking at Maya, still in the witness chair, her hands finally still in her lap, her eyes fixed on mine across the width of the courtroom, waiting, not for triumph, not for relief, but simply to see what I would do now that it was over. I didn't cross the courtroom to Maya right away. I let the gallery clear first, let Derek and Prescott gather their papers in a silence heavier than any argument could have been. Then I walked to where my daughter still sat, and I didn't say anything wise or forgiving. I just put my hand over hers on the wooden rail, and she let me, and for a moment that was the entire conversation. The weeks after moved faster than the months before them had. Voss Capital Advisory's collapse made the business section within 10 days, then the front page within 3 weeks, once 2 more clients came forward describing disbursement letters that didn't match their actual account balances. The State Securities Division's investigation, already underway because of Renata's complaint, became the spine of a criminal referral that grew heavier by the week. Derek was charged with securities fraud and breach of fiduciary duty by early summer. Frank, who tracked the filings the way other men track baseball scores, told me the government's exhibit list ran to over 60 pages, most of it built from records Frank himself had first laid out, color-coded, on my kitchen table. I didn't feel triumphant reading about it. I felt, mostly, tired in a way that had been building since March and had finally been given permission to land. Trust control returned to me formally in July, a signature and a notarized stamp closing out 4 months of fighting to prove I was exactly who I'd always been. Renata handed me the final paperwork in her office, and I remember holding it and feeling almost nothing, which surprised me more than feeling triumphant would have. You did the hard part, Renata said. The paperwork's just catching up to the truth. Maya moved into the guest house behind the main property in late July, temporary, we both said, though neither of us defined what temporary meant or how long it was allowed to last. The divorce filing went through without complication. There was little left for Derek to fight her over, and less appetite in him for fighting anything at all. She started a job at a non-profit downtown, modest pay, longer hours than her old life, and she never once complained about either. We didn't talk about March very often. When we did, it was in pieces, offered carefully, the way you'd hand someone something breakable. One Sunday evening in August, she came up to the main house with a bag of tomatoes from the little garden plot she'd started behind the guest house. Insisting my own garden, still recovering from a summer of neglect, needed the help. We stood together at the kitchen counter, slicing them for a sauce neither of us had made in years, and for a long while neither of us said anything at all. I used to help you do this, Maya said finally, not looking up from the cutting board. Standing right about here, you were terrible at it. You'd eat half the tomatoes before they made it into the pot. She laughed, surprised, like she hadn't expected herself capable of it yet. I don't remember that, I do. I set my knife down for a moment. I remember a lot of things you don't, Maya. That's what 30 years does. It gives you memories nobody else was paying close enough attention to keep. Her hand stilled on the cutting board. I think about that. How much of it I might have already lost, if things had gone the way he wanted in March. I didn't answer that directly. There wasn't an answer that wouldn't have cracked something open neither of us was ready to walk through yet. Instead I picked my knife back up, and after a moment, so did she, and we finished the sauce mostly in silence, the good kind, the kind that doesn't need filling. Priya still came by twice a week, officially just to check in, though we both understood by then it had stopped being a job in any way that mattered. She'd started bringing her own tea instead of drinking mine, a small, quiet joke between us about the quality of my cupboard. Frank showed up most Thursday evenings with the same terrible gas station coffee he'd always preferred, and some nights Maya joined us on the porch, listening to two old fraud investigators argue amiably about cases 20 years gone, and some nights she didn't, and I let her have the space to decide for herself which kind of evening she needed. It wasn't the ending I would have designed for myself back in March, crouched behind a stranger's hedge with my knees screaming in my whole life. About to be signed away by people who thought I wouldn't notice. I hadn't gotten a clean, decisive victory with everyone properly sorted into who deserved what. I'd gotten something messier and slower, a daughter 200 feet away instead of gone. Learning how to trust me again in small, uneven steps, at exactly the pace she could manage and not one step faster. That night, after Maya had gone back to the guest house and the kitchen was clean and quiet, I sat down at Robert's old desk, the one that was fully, uncontestedly mine again. The final trust documents sat where Renata's office had sent them weeks ago, still in their sealed envelope, my name printed alone across the top where two names used to be. I didn't open it, I didn't need to read it again to know what it said. I already knew, the way I'd known everything else that had mattered this year, not because someone had told me, but because I'd gone and found it out myself. One careful fact at a time, I turned off the desk lamp and left the envelope exactly where it was.